Z National, that Big Thief with their new single, Forgotten Eyes, from the album Two Hands. It's coming up 3 minutes to 11, and I'll read out some of your texts regarding our question on it was called the Lunatic Asylum initially, the Auckland Provincial Lunatic Asylum, and many texts and many memories have come through. This person says, the Looney Bin. My grandparents lived at the bottom of 4th Avenue, later renamed Fontenoy Street. I was there regularly to mow their lawns. My father, Brian Knight, was often called on to rescue people from the asylum. He was a practicing psychotherapist. I think that's Fontenoy Street. You might have to correct me in the pronunciation of that. And regarding the Mills family, Mills used to live next to Raylan Park. Also in the Mills shopping arcade, there was Bruce Cameron and Don Oliver. There was a butcher there.
You're tuned to the Pacific service of Radio New Zealand International. We'll be off the air now for about 30 seconds on aerial change. When we come back, we'll be beaming our signal to listeners in Australia, Bougainville, the Solomon Islands, and Timor. Please stay tuned.
Z News at 11. Good evening, I'm Susana Layatawa. The government's books are in the best shape for a decade, boosted by a big tax windfall and one-off accounting gains. The surplus for the year ended June was $7.5 billion, $2 billion up on the previous year, and compared to a forecast of $3.5 billion. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, is promising record investments in health and education. Here's business editor Giles Beexford.
The government was certainly flush with cash at the end of June, even after spending on schools, hospitals, income support and infrastructure in its first year. The $6 billion rise in the tax take reflects the relative strength of the economy, low unemployment and steady consumer spending. That runs counter to the gloomy mood shown in recent surveys. The bottom line was boosted by a $2.6 billion gain in the value of the rail network. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says there's no sign the economy is headed for a recession, and the government's in a stronger position to cope with whatever happens globally, as well as push on with key social and infrastructure spending. This is Giles Beckford.
The Commerce Commission says a computer containing confidential information stolen from a contractor's home was not password protected. The consumer watchdog has launched 2 independent inquiries after the equipment was taken in a burglary last week. The Commission says the computer contained hundreds of meeting and interview transcripts dating back to early 2016. The chair, Anna Rawlings, says they are no longer using the contractor who failed in her obligation to keep information safe. A day that was touted to be controversial has ended reasonably well, as the replica of James Cook's Endeavour berthed at Turanganui, Akiwa. More than 400 people gathered on Waikanai Beach to watch a waka-led flotilla make its way into Gisborne's inner harbour. Our reporter at the scene says there was a whakatau for the crew members of the Endeavour and the tall ships, and each received a taonga as they disembarked. Tuia 250 co-chair Hoturoa Barclay Kerr urged everyone to continue to acknowledge the country's history, not just from 250 years ago, but from when the first voyagers came to New Zealand. About 50 protesters were across the wharf from the Endeavour, and another group was stationed across the road when the dignitaries arrived for their kai at Bushmere Arms. A second high-profile Christchurch business leader has publicly supported Mbashal's councillor Dion Swiggs. Last week, an independent investigator found that complaints of inappropriate behaviour against Mr Swiggs will require a full investigation. Mr Swiggs resumed his campaign to get re-elected last weekend after taking a break during an initial assessment of the complaints. This morning, Christchurch businessman Richard Peebles publicly voiced his support for Mr Swiggs, and this afternoon, hospitality and tourism leader Peter Morrison has done the same. Mr Morrison says the timing of the media leak about the allegations is clearly political shenanigans, and it was very apparent to him. He says Mr Swiggs has consistently had the city and people at the centre of what he does and works very hard to bring about positive change. The Prime Minister of the Netherlands and Jacinda Ardern have discussed climate change, trade, Brexit and the Christchurch call at a meeting in Auckland. Mark Rutte and Ms Ardern met at Government House this afternoon on the first day of his visit to New Zealand. Ms Ardern says the two countries are like-minded and face common issues such as tackling climate change. Mr Rutte says the Netherlands and New Zealand should work shoulder to shoulder.
Because we think similarly on many of these international issues, protecting the international legal order and bolstering the multilateral trade system.
Netherlands Prime Minister Mark Rutte. The police say they now know the identity of a body found in a Kaitaia Creek today. Officers were called to the scene near Allan Bell Drive just after 1 o'clock this afternoon. The police say while formal identification is yet to take place, they know who the dead man is. They are working with the family and the coroner. The police say a post-mortem is to be completed tomorrow morning in Auckland, and the death is still being treated as unexplained at this stage. Witnesses to a crash on Napier's Marine Parade that killed a cyclist are being asked to contact the police. The cyclist died after being struck by a car just after 11 o'clock this morning. The road was closed for much of the day. That's the news.
Small town New Zealand. Everyone knows each other's names. Surely someone would know something. If Barry did do it, he would have had to return home, slaughter his wife, drag her body to Sharon's Creek, set fire to her remains, and then return to the bar to finish his pitcher of beer.
Killjoy. All your true crime dreams come true in the Friday Comedy on Nights. This Friday, just after 8. RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland fine apart from areas of morning fog and isolated showers. In the west from Auckland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mostly cloudy with drizzle morning and evenings, but afternoon fine spells too. Whanganui to Wellington, cloudy periods with drizzle tonight, fine spells increasing tomorrow afternoon. Brisbane to Wairarapa, fine apart from cloudy periods about Tararua district. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with increasing high cloud. Scattered rain developing about the Canterbury High Country tomorrow. Bulla, cloudy with occasional showers. Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls. Otago and Southland, often cloudy with scattered rain. Chatham Islands, cloudy, fine spells later tomorrow. RNZ National. We funded through New Zealand On Air. Coming up to 6.5 minutes past 11. Our next news and weather is at midnight.
Thanks, Susanna. You're listening tonight with Anna Thomas. And here's Trevor Reiki with another episode of Worlds of Music.
to Worlds of Music, a music program celebrating an eclectic mix of trans-global music, fusion and folk roots. Pretty much anything that strikes a certain chord, right? Kicking off this program is an instrumental by Iraqi oud player Rahim El-Haj, who played WOMAD New Zealand in 2018. Twice Grammy nominated, Rahim El-Haj is now an American citizen who was born in Baghdad and was once in prison for his activism under the realm of Saddam Hussein. Here is Rahim El-Haj playing oud, accompanied by 2 violins, viola, cello, contrabass and percussion on this instrumental called The Last Time We Will Fly Birds, taken from his excellent album Letters from Iraq, oud and string quintet. song called Daba is the title track from an album just released by Marrakesh-born singer who is considered to be an ambassador for Moroccan music. Drawing her inspiration from the Nawa universe and cultures from the desert, is incorporating jazzy harmonisations with African rhythms. Conceived in Paris and recorded in Berlin, new album called Daba, meaning now in Arabic, is addressing issues including climate change, the fate of immigrants, and the status of women. There's a great video for that song Daba up on YouTube. Coming up now is a track by Ensemble Montenegro, taken from an album called Stand Up People, Gypsy Pop Songs from Tito's Yugoslavia, 1964 to 1980. The album was curated by a couple of young vinyl lovers, Philip Knox and Nathaniel Morris, two crazy Brits who travelled the length and breadth of Serbia, Kosovo, Bosnia and Macedonia in search of old 7-inch singles recorded by the Romani Gypsies. Later in the program, we are featuring an interview with Nathaniel Morris talking about their adventures curating the album on an impoverished budget. Here's the Ensemble Montenegro and their song Jalem Jalem. into Worlds of Music and you can check our playlist on rnz.co.nz or simply type into Google RNZ Worlds of Music and you'll find archived every program of Worlds of Music to date. This next track is an instrumental by the Trio Joubran. 3 oud playing brothers from Palestine, who for me were one of the highlights of WOMAD New Zealand in 2012. Earlier this year they released their new album, The Long March. They've been pretty quiet for a while, so it's nice to have them back with this album that is different from their previous catalogue, adding additional instruments like synths and piano. This composition is called The Age of Industry.
Israel,